Hello, welcome to the Expand the Fan Bracket Base panel. I'd like to ask all the panelists to introduce themselves. And we've decided beforehand, Michael, we were right here, that this really refers to bringing in anyone who didn't feel welcome before, or reaching out to people who never even thought of themselves as participating in the Fanish community. So, and we can morph off that as you wish, but if you'd like to introduce yourselves and tell people a little bit about yourself, please.
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Mike Arnzen. Nice to meet everybody. I've been writing horror for going on 30 years now, and have won multiple Bram Stoker Awards for it. And I've been coming to Confluence as well in Pittsburgh ever since I've moved to this region about 20 years ago. It's a great conference. I couldn't let it go. I had to join you via Zoom to keep the fun going. I look forward to chatting with everybody today.
Thank you. I see we have Jennifer. I'll let Jennifer, we're just doing the introductions. So Scott, did you want to go next?
Yes, I'm Scott Edelman. I've been going to conventions since I was 15 years old, so that's 50 years of attending conventions. This will be my year since I was 14 when I have not gone to a physical in-person convention. So it's a very strange year after 49 consecutive years of going to conventions to have my first year when they have gone virtual. Unlike Michael, I am not a Bram Stoker award-winning writer. I am the Susan Lucci of Bram Stoker Awards. I am at 0 and 8, so I am the person who has been nominated the most times without ever having won an award. However, I have a new book out called Things That Never Happened from Cemetery Dance, and it has 13 of my stories in it, 4 of which were Stoker nominees. I am also the host of a podcast called Eating the Fantastic, in which I take someone out for breakfast, lunch, or dinner, put microphones on, and you're eavesdropping on the conversation that we're having. And I also use that to expand the fan base. And then I'm not just interviewing people who have been around forever, like Ramsey Campbell or William F. Nolan or George R. R. Martin, who have been guests, but also newcomers to the field to help expand their voices as well.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I'm
We're in a
Jennifer. Yeah, what's the question?
Just, preliminary introductions and
Okay.
relationship to fans.
Okay. My name is Jennifer Foehner Wells, and I write space opera, science fiction. I started in 2014. I have 5 novels published, working on the 6th, and recently just released an omnibus of my first 3 novels with the associated short stories. And that is called the Confluence Codex #1. So that was just released, and yeah.
I would ask the panelists, if you're mentioning a book title or whatever, to please put it into the chat. That way, if I'm too slow to do it, I know it's in there and people can catch these things. No, that's great. As I said, I'm Julie Czerneda, for those who've never heard the name said, and I'm a science fiction fantasy author and editor published by Daw Books since '97. And I've got a couple of new books out this year, writing a book. It's a very different time. The only thing I'll say about being virtual is that I can get to conventions like this one I would not have been able to do. So as far as accessibility goes, this has actually been an interestingly accessible year for me. I'm up in Canada, for one thing. So to go forth, why do we have to be concerned about welcoming new generation and new fans? What's the issue here? I think, Scott, you touched on it at the beginning.
Well, there are a number of things. I mean, as I said, I've been doing this since I was 15 years old, and this is my place. This is where I feel welcome. This is my second family, and it pains me to think that this is a place where other people might not feel as welcome, that there are people who might consider coming and be scared off by some of the things they think make it unwelcoming, or actually show up and discover there are certain things unwelcoming about it for a variety of reasons, ranging from sexual harassment, misgendering, policing of the borders of fandom. You always hear that all the time. Oh, you don't know this little bit of trivia from this old TV show, therefore you're not a real fan because you haven't memorized every episode of Star Trek back to the beginning. You don't know who was originally cast for this show or that show. So all of that is going on, and and as I said, it hurts me to think that there might be people who would come in and say, "I'm not being treated well. The tent is being not widened." When I gave my guest of honor speech at World Fantasy last year, I hired an ASL interpreter because I wanted to make sure that it's welcoming to everyone. Even things as small as use your microphone when you're on a panel. Don't say, "Oh, everybody can hear me." That kind of thing. So there are many, many issues. I just tossed out, some of them, but there are many issues, and I just think that we all have to work harder. I could ramble on for the whole time, so I'm going to shut up. But I just have many, many thoughts about that. I'll just mention one more simple thing, and then I'll stop. WorldCon a long time ago started handing out first WorldCon ribbons because you see people at WorldCon, you end up sometimes people have so many ribbons on their badge they touch the floor and they're going to trip over them. But if it's the first WorldCon you've ever been to, they give you a badge that says first WorldCon. I've made it a mission if I'm walking down the hall and I see someone with a first WorldCon ribbon on to walk over to them and say hello. Why'd you come? Why was this year your first one? Tell them about my first con. Let them know if they have questions to come and find me. So there's at least one, familiar face, and we're glad they're here, because so often people, they'll be in the bar or the con suite and they're talking to their friends, and there's somebody in the corner who's wondering how to break in. And fandom should not only be for those of us who feel they're outgoing and can walk up to a stranger and say, "Hi, what are you doing here?" It should also be for people who might be less so, without invading the space of someone who prefer not to be bothered. So there is that balance. So that's enough for me for now. But that's sort of what I'm getting at with expanding and making sure it's not just turning into a bunch of old friends getting older and older, and all the new possible friends we could have go away.
Michael.
Well, I echo everything Scott just said. I think it's very important for places like conventions to be inclusive, and that also goes for anthologies and other kind of clusters of writers or people with common kind of, I almost want to say beliefs, common worldviews. I remember when I went to my first World Horror Convention, I felt like I had finally found my church. It was like my tribe, my people. And, I was just getting started as a writer. That is why I went. So perhaps I have a very, skewed conception of all this, because to me, it should have some professional interest of some kind. Even if it's just touching base with fans, meeting your readers, chit-chatting with people who have followed your work as a writer, I think that all matters a great deal. But I am a fan first too, and I became a writer because I was such a fan of all the books I was reading, all the stories I was reading, and I just kind of kept investigating this strange world of the genre, and eventually, I wanted to connect with other people who were as crazy as I was. So, that's what it's all about, right? There's nothing.
Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say, there's nothing like crazy about fandom. The word goes back to like fanatic, right? Fan is a fanatic. But nowadays, I think that's everybody's a fan of something, and the culture at large kind of recognizes that. So there's no shame in being a fan. There is more shame in feeling alienated and alone in the world, and not finding your tribe. So, like, if you like science fiction, you read it all the time, you should, come to places like Confluence and connect with like-minded spirits.
Jennifer?
I would echo what the other panelists said, but I would also say that those disenfranchised people want to see themselves. They want to see themselves in the books that they read and the media that they consume. And I know as a woman, growing up, I was interested in science fiction from birth. My father specifically, introduced me to Star Wars and all those wonderful things. And I remember not seeing a lot of female protagonists. I remember seeing a lot of very dense scientific jargon early on, and I sort of wandered away from that and tried other genres to read, and read voraciously all sorts of different things. But now the world is changing for the better, and we see more representation. And I think that the new readers that are coming up have expectations that we need to help fulfill. We need to make sure that they see themselves, not just in the pages of the books, but also in their idols, the people that are writing these things. So we need to support and help some of our new writers coming up, make sure that everyone has the same opportunities, because that just doesn't naturally happen. We have to make that happen. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. I see the new generation. I'm lucky enough to have a 17-year-old son, and the way he views the world is so refreshingly different from the way my parents viewed the world, in the 70s when I was growing up. And it is a joy to see these new generations embracing the diversity. And it used to be that science fiction, the very earliest science fiction, was often written depicting how older white men benefited from science. And now we're evolving, and it's more about how the science impacts society as a whole. And I think that there's more social science coming into science fiction now, and more character-driven science fiction. Which
I'll pause you there only because what we write is something that's another whole aspect of this, which we can get back to. But in terms of conventions specifically, I'm
convention specifically. I'm sorry.
No. It's, what you said is absolutely fantastic. I totally agree. I was just going to cycle back to conventions, the points that Scott made and Michael made as well. And I can tell you two short stories on my part. One is I had the same idea. I was a professional nonfiction writer, and I was given the information about a convention to go to about my novel that I'd never sent out. And I walk in the door all dressed up with a briefcase, ready to be at a business convention. And people walked by me in t-shirts that had Star Wars on them and Star Trek and all this stuff. And they were costumes. So I went home and I got my Yoda shirt, and I felt much better right away. So I found my people in that sense. But flipping forward from a professional sense, I've been at a convention, and it wasn't all that long ago. It was maybe 15 years ago, where the chair of the con in public just right up in front and said, well, I hope you're going to write fantasy one day, because I never read science fiction by women. And I was taken aback because I hadn't actually had that in my face before. And while a reader is free to read whatever a reader wants, the way we present ourselves, as you said quite rightly, in a convention, be we the author, the con-com, or whoever, everybody's listening. And that's the kind of thing you have to be very, very careful about what you're saying.
Well, he knew what he was saying. I mean, he knew what he wanted. He had an agenda, and he knew what he was saying.
He didn't particularly care what anybody else was thinking.
Right.
But fast forwarding, I'd like to hear from you. What is the single best thing you've seen come out regarding conventions and inclusivity within, say, the last 3 years of actually being in a physical convention?
Oh boy, there's a whole bunch of things. One is something I saw first at comic book conventions, which ended up shifting to science fiction and fantasy conventions, which is the code of conduct displayed clearly at the entrance all over the place, so that people going in know, for example, that cosplay is not consent. We tend to see less cosplay. Tend to be more cosplay at the comic book themed conventions than are smaller science fiction, fantasy, horror conventions, but it is still an issue to be able to say cosplay is not consent, so that's good. I have seen some conventions that on the by the microphone, so that you, the moderator, any of us calls on someone in the audience to make sure, well, A, use the microphone, B, leave gender out of it, so you don't accidentally misgender someone and have them feel, yeah, I don't belong here. So, say, oh, you in the Star Wars T-shirt, or you there in the green hat or with the black backpack or something. Don't say that, and don't say ladies and gentlemen anymore. As I used decades past. We live in a far more than binary world, and I want everyone to feel comfortable here. So those are two steps to think about. And just the last one is people are beginning, but we are really not there yet, to have ASL interpreters and subtitling for all panels, because I have met people who were not able to fully participate in the convention experience. There's one person I met at a CapClave a couple of years ago, maybe it was a Balticon, it was a good Balticon, who said online, the same line online, no one knows you're a dog, that famous New Yorker cartoon. She said, online, I am the equal of every other writer. We chat, I write my stories, and this is a person who had a disability that prevented fully participating in the convention experience. And I come here, this person said, and I am not. I am behind everybody, and I can't make the advancements in my career that other people can. And so we need to do that. That's one that started to happen. It needs to happen more vigorously.
Thank you. Michael? Positive things you've seen at conventions in the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, just the whole culture is changed. I think speculative fiction people already are have felt like outsiders to the mainstream culture. So there has been a relative ease in which our culture has kind of become more inclusive, accommodating, and adjusting to that, despite the horror stories you hear about, say, the example you gave, Julie, the ex-president of the SFF, WA, all these crazy things that happened maybe about 6 years ago or something like that, where a lot of sexism, racism, and things like that were kind of outed, and people started speaking, truth to those events. Now I feel like the multicultural element of who we are is almost self-evident and taken for granted. But I would say that specifically in conferences I've been to, there have been more kind of like learning experiences that are in the foreground regarding different marginalized groups. So you might have a panel on, say, queer horror or Black authors or something like that, without it feeling like a token panel, but as a chance to learn more for people that might not be part of that group. And it's really rewarding to see that. And I like the way that our genre panels, at least as I've experienced them, have always seemed to have really legitimate educational value. People come to these things as learners. They walk away from them better than they were when they first came. I've rarely seen a bad panel where I didn't pick up something new from it. So, I think a lot of those cultural politics have kind of happened organically at genre conventions in a good way. I mean, I'm making generalizations, but that's kind of the feeling I have.
So Jennifer?
Again, just echoing what my male counterparts have said, we want more inclusivity, more accessibility. I hadn't even thought about ASL. That would be phenomenal if we could have that at every single panel. But I have seen, I have to base my my assessment on what other people have told me about what cons used to be like, because I didn't start attending cons until 2014. I really haven't seen a lot of the things that people have complained about. But I believe that they're real. And I guess what I would like to see the most from con runners is accountability, visible help if something goes wrong, and encouragement. be it financial or otherwise, to help people who are more marginalized to get to the cons. Because until that becomes more equitable, you know, we need to encourage everyone to help them find their people, you know, their come to Jesus moment like we have all had, you know. So yeah, that's, from what I've understood over the last decade or so, I think that the most important thing is that the people who run cons are accountable, that they're accessible and visible help for people who are having problems.
Absolutely. Excellent
I think
points. Oh, can I just?
No, go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead, Julie.
I was just going to add, you touched on cost, and for me that has always been a big one. Travel costs, I just can't go to a convention unless I'm a guest of honor for most 90% of the time, unless they're within a very short drive. So it's always been a thing of, you know, as you say, they're good for professional development, but if you're not a professional yet, how do you get developed if you can't afford to go? So one of the things, I mean, I've helped with scholarships for people to go, and I'm really happy to see a lot of the conventions I've been to in the last, say, 5, 6, even longer, now have, not only do they have a very quiet policy of if you can't come, let us know. We have a bit of funding, we can help you. All the way to, if you're a student, you get in free. And it doesn't matter what you're a student of, you just get to come. Especially as you say, Michael, about the ability to learn from these things. I mean, this is a wonderful opportunity. And for teachers as well, I mean, that's something else I was involved with for many years, and that's to have a teacher's day and to find funding for them to be able to go. And I noticed that many things right now that they're offering any marginalized people who need help to get memberships, dues for SIF or whatever it is, step up and say yes. But on the other hand, it's hard to step up and say yes to these things. So I'm wondering about now, how do we provide a voice to people who still would like to see something happen? I mean, where do they go? Do they write to SIFWA? Do they write to convention organizers? We're not known as people who reach out very easily. So how do we do it?
Well, I do know that SIFWA does some fundraising and does offer, I don't know if it's stipends directly, then they might offer stipends directly to individuals. If they apply, I think there's an application window in the fall, probably right about now actually. And but they also offer funding towards cons for just this very reason, to help support people of color and other marginalized people to be able to attend cons. So I know that that's available, and a little Googling will get you, the specifics about that. But yeah, if you are looking for that, now is the time, I think, to look for that kind of support. But yeah, I would appeal directly to the con and to SIFWA or any other organization that represents what you write.
Now, we say SIFWA, we're talking about the SFWA. And if you Google that, you'll find it. And when we say CONCOM, we're talking about the people who run conventions. And if you're a first-time convention person at this convention, we must make sure we tell you what we're saying with such ease, because I actually didn't know CONCOM stood for a convention committee for about my first 10 conventions. I thought it was just a fun made-up word. So there you go, some information for you. And you can find that information and who to contact on their websites. Typically, that's one thing that's now available that wasn't always the case.
And thank you for doing that, Julie, because we can so often use jargon as a gatekeeping thing. That's just another thing that's gatekeeping. And then when the other person doesn't know it, lord it over them, or make them feel small for not knowing it, instead of using it as an opportunity to say, oh, here's something wonderful you should know about, which is what often can happen with a good book. You make the person feel foolish not having heard of a particular book, and instead what you can do is say, oh, lucky you, you have not read this yet and you get to experience it for the first time. And that makes it a welcoming thing rather than a pushing people away thing. And to go with what Jennifer said about, science fiction, used to being about what, science being white guys out, we do a great crime. The science fiction of my youth was primarily, white cishet older dudes, well, not necessarily older dudes, but guys who well, what the crime is if someone comes in and says, "Oh, what's a great science fiction that I can read? Give me some recommendations. I want to find out more about this," and we're giving them a litany of science fiction classics written in the 40s and 50s, and saying, "Oh, you must read and know everything about Heinlein, everything about Asimov, everything about Clarke," all of whom have done wonderful things in their place, but that is not who you recommend to someone to say, you can find yourself in this. There are too many panels on. Oh, I remember there's a panel on new animal fantasy or something like this, and people were mentioning Watership Down. It's like Watership Down was 30 years ago, and of course a good book. But if someone wants to find a good book, how about this century or this decade, or saying, check out N.K. Jemisin, check out Bo Bolander, check out Sarah Pinsker, Amala Motar, a whole bunch of other people. So we're those are the people who will be tomorrow what some of the names I mentioned were to some of the older folks. And when I was coming in, I was not reading the science fiction from the 20s. That would be as if someone said, read the first year or two of Amazing Stories from 1928, 1929, and you'll see what's great about science fiction. And me, in reading it in the mid to late 60s, I would have said, what the heck is this? So we have to realize that for the new generation, the same rules apply.
And to also, I'd add to that, because that's an excellent point, respect people's choice of genre and medium. I mean, gamers and people who write for games and people who are media focused. And how many times I've seen people say, well, if you watch it, it's not as good as if you read it. Well, I'm sorry, a lot of people, I would say majority of my family don't consume books, they consume media. And that's fine, in comic books, all these different things. Also, keeping in mind what's modern and what's not. Michael, did you want to speak to this too?
Oh boy, you got me thinking about in a sociological way about all this stuff. So, I think Scott's right. Like 30 years ago, 20 years ago, maybe even as much as 10 years ago, the dominant culture at conventions would be like white guys, right? And that kind of was a product of publishing culture. But at the same time, some of those genre writers were some of the most progressive liberal people in America too. So it's like really interesting the way that science fiction it's kind of been an outsider genre all along. But like any subculture, it has its spectrum of conservative and progressive kind of elements. And I think nowadays the kind of liberal progressive side, that side of the political spectrum is becoming the dominant, and it's also growing in the mass culture at large. So, I mean, I'm just thinking sociologically here, but I think in a way, conventions have caught up with the dominant culture's progressive nature the way it is now.
We like to think they caught up to science fiction, but go for it.
Right, but exactly. And, publishing has evolved too. Yes. So we are seeing more writers like N.K. Jemisin and whatnot, at the forefront of genre publishing. So it's really kind of just interesting and fascinating. If you're a fan, though, maybe you don't even really think so much about any of that. You just love the stories, right? Well, you got to remember that's at the core of that's what makes us common. That's what holds us kind of connected as a group, is our kind of inclinations towards storytellings that celebrate wonder, investigate the unknown, and thrill at the danger of the dark side, and kind of exploring the taboo as well, right? So,
when I started writing, I thought actually to be published you had to be dead. I mean, I started quite young, and I just thought that that was required. Always published posthumously. One thing I did discover was that conventions let me meet the people behind the words, and if I really, or even if I met someone I'd never read, but I liked what they sounded like and the things that came out of their mouth and how they laughed, or like Scott, if you were approachable, I found I typically did like their work. Not always, but it was a much better indicator than just the title or a list or whatever like that, to actually meet people. So it's this is another part of conventions. We want everyone to be able to share. All right. Let me think. Where are we going now? We've got about 20 minutes before question and answer. I'm going to throw it out to you guys. What would you like to say next about the welcoming the next new generations to physical conventions? Let's just keep it on that basis. Or virtual ones. Why not? I know you've got something, Scott. I can see you twinkling.
Well, I don't want to monopolize things. I've thought about this so much, and I gave an entire speech about it at at the World Fantasy Convention. But just all the things we have to do. It's unfortunate. I've had some people, come up to me at one point at a convention and look around and say, "Gee, I don't know any of these people." Someone else with some gray in their hair, they're used to just hanging around with their old friends. And I say, well, whose fault is that you don't know any of these people? I mean, you've got to go up to them and not be so imposing. I see someone in the question and answers asked, what about for the people who are too timid? Well, I should point out, going back to the beginning, science fiction has always tended to have hierarchies. I mean, remember when Star Trek came in, and that began the change in the way conventions were populated, more women started showing up in science fiction conventions. There was the, oh, well, you're only a Trekkie type thing. You're not a real science fiction fan. You're only a Trekkie. And at the same time as people were saying, why are we all gray-haired and people going around on scooters now? And where are the kids? Well, the kids are going to San Diego Comic-Con and the other conventions because we've made it seem as if, well, you're not a real science fiction fan. Of course, the question is, is a real science fiction fan the person who, read a whole ton of books, or is a real science fiction fan the person who spent 1,000 hours last year making a costume of the character they really love from one of those books, and yet they can come and be mocked. So there's a whole bunch of things, we have to, do to make sure that everyone's fandom is accepted. I mean, when I went to thinking I was 16 years old, probably my second convention, a Lunacon, and it was a talk about Heinlein's work. And I was talking about Stranger in a Strange Land and said, oh, well, that's not a real, Heinlein just wrote that to make fun of all you hippie kids, because back then I had long hair and a headband and all that. His real books are The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and Starship Troopers. That's really what he feels, and you're just silly for liking, Stranger in a Strange Land and all that hippy-dippy stuff. And I could have left, at that point, but I was, knew this is where I had to be, but we have to make sure that not everybody is stubborn, as I am and willing to stay. So we have to, make sure there's room for all that.
We did have a question that relates to it. You probably saw this as well. Newer fans and newer writers can be intimidated by authors they've read for years. What suggestions do you have for those too timid to walk up to you? I'll start off by confessing that I am a huge C.J. Cherryh fan, and I have been since her first book came out. And she and I share a publisher, and so they knew how much I loved her, and they sat us side by side at my very first convention dinner as a published author, and I couldn't even find oxygen in the air. She talked to my son across the way, who was 15 at the time, about gaming for the entire dinner, and I just went. So, it takes persistence sometimes. But don't be afraid to, because I mean, she told me later, she actually gave me a hug another time we met and said, you can talk to me, I'm actually just a normal person.
That's what we have to remember. We're all people, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like when the child figures out that their teacher is actually human, like does things that everybody does, right? You see your teacher at the grocery store and you're like, what are they doing here? Right?
But in terms of, so what about an actual suggestion? One suggestion to you that like a good icebreaker. So Michael, to walk up to someone that you've idolized.
Well, this is a tough one because, the writer never really knows if the person that's lurking at the end of the line or something like that on the fringes knows them or is trying to. It's a human relationship thing. And a lot of people there's a whole gamut of personalities. Some writers are kind of stuck up and don't even want to talk to fans, They're just like at the con to meet with their publisher or something. And then there's the kind of gregarious, people who cultivate their fans and want to interact, live in a very active way. that too can kind of push a reader or a fan off. They're like, wait a minute, you're a salesman now, you're not an author. And so it's very complicated. There is no simple answer to this. But if you do pay to go to a conference, you've already made an investment to do that kind of thing. So don't squander your money by hiding in your hotel room. I think this is why everybody goes to the bar, to be blunt. At the bar, if a drink can kind of wash away some of your hang-ups and loosen you up a little bit. And the writers and editors you might know that are at the bar are there because they're open to meeting new people. So.
And the parties,
Yeah.
room
One of
parties.
the things I do is I rehearse. I mean, and believe me, let's see, when was the last time I saw someone who I had to think about the London World Con, I believe, which is what, 5, 6 years, maybe 2014. It was 2014. That was 6 years ago. I never met Brian Aldiss, great science fiction writer, and one of the things with that as well is try to ask a question that's not the question that they got to ask a million times, because I think people tend to blur out. So if there's a character in a story that really touched you, or something that you were moved by, or something that might be a little bit different, or if you know something, and if you know they're into sports, you can ask about their sports team, or they're into restaurants, ask them about that. But I knew that Brian Aldiss, for a birthday party, had a George Formby impersonator, who was a ukulele guy in the UK, come and do a concert with him. And I went over to him and started talking about George Formby. We ended up singing George Formby songs to each other. But often I think rehearse in your head what it's going to be, and if you can have one or two questions, because what does someone say if you say, "Oh boy, I love everything, I love you, I love your book"? I mean, some people might get embarrassed with the squee or not know what to do with it, but it always does help if in your head you have a particular thing or two you want to say. Most people will not bite your head off. Most people are not walking around with their heads stuck in the clouds, but don't do what some people did at a Worldcon once and follow Stephen King into the bathroom kind of thing, which some people at a certain level, when you're at Stephen King level, when he left the bathroom, I watched as a ring of people were waiting around the door of the men's room just to talk to him, kind of thing. But most people are human beings and made of flesh and blood, and don't mind it. But I do find that it has always helped, going back to the beginning, whoever I was speaking to have something more beyond "I love your work," because that's what they say. They say thank you and the conversation is over. So if it can be an open one. And Gay Haldeman had a great idea on how to talk to people. We had a panel on "Is this your first Worldcon?" and she was recommending, if you're in an art show or you're in the dealer's room, and you happen to notice you're next to someone both looking at things at a table or looking at I love the one with the spaceship and the Saturn there. What do you think about this one over here? It's something, which is your favorite painting, or do you like this piece of jewelry, or do you know any of these books for sale on the table? Would you recommend one more than another? So there are a whole bunch of little icebreakers that you can come up with that's wider than just, "Oh, I love you and I read your book and I've read it a million times." So, which is still good to say. People love to hear that. They don't hear that enough, but something more that makes the conversation continue on.
Yeah. I met, I'll let you go, Jennifer, after this, but you reminded me that I first met Betsy Wilhelm by stalking the poor woman through the jewelry section of the World Fantasy, because that's the only time that they were coming out to see Prize dinner was to check out the jewelry. So I went up and I did say hello and introduce myself, and she was lovely, just a lovely, warm, normal, delightful human being with the power of, a minor god. But it was really nice to be able to do that. Jennifer, what's your bit of advice?
First, just a quick story. I was once at, I think it was Worldcon a few years ago, and I kind of forgot where I was. It was really early. I hadn't had my coffee yet. And I'm sitting at a table in the SFWA room, and this guy comes up and he's looking at some papers, and I thought to myself, well, that guy's, doing a George R.R. Martin cosplay. And then I sort of woke up and realized I was sitting next to George R.R. Martin. And I was just like, petrified. I didn't say much, but, these things happen. But what I wanted to say earlier, and maybe I'm a little bit behind, but I wanted to admonish us all not to forget that just because we don't like a certain thing, a certain story, a certain movie, that it's not bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's just not for us. There is no fake geek girl. That doesn't exist. If someone says they like something, they like it. And we don't need to know anything else about that. Yeah, not everybody likes everything. And that's why, when you look at Amazon and you look at the reviews of a book, it's absolutely normal to see many negative reviews and many positive reviews for the same book, because not everybody sees things the same way. So let's not revoke people's geek cred card. Let's just celebrate the diversity and the fact that we all, love different things.
Beautifully put. I'm going to go on to another question. We're in our last 10 minutes. What's the best way to make conventions known to young people? And I'm one of these people that found out about one word of mouth. I will say that if it's still there, I believe Locus Magazine Online has a portal which actually lists conventions. And that's a really, really great resource. So that's Locus Magazine. I should probably type that in. That would be useful. Locus Magazine. It's online now. And they will list the major ones. And you can ask at your local science fiction and fantasy bookstore, they will know. And many times they will actually be working there. And if you know of one, go to the local library or bookstore and ask if you can put up a poster for it. That's something I do for every convention I know I'm going to, because, it's all volunteers, as certain people have mentioned already in the chat. And they don't have the extra time to know everywhere. They're going to go with what's been working before. So if you have an extra place where you can share the information, absolutely share it. And last but not least, we have a question from Marcy. What types of programming or con activities can be done to welcome new readers or fans and discourage gatekeeping? I think you touched on Scott, you talked about the Welcome to Your First Worldcon panel. There are always some kind of welcome to your first panel, which are usually just attended by people who've been there. But I do recommend you go to find out what's there and to welcome people. Any other ideas you have?
Well, the other thing, Michael was mentioning, women in science fiction, African American in science fiction. Too often you've got that one panel on, Black science fiction or, science fiction or women in science fiction, and then it becomes, they're all crowded into that one panel. No, if you're doing the hard SF panel, make sure there's a representation of all, races, gender expression, sexuality, etc. throughout the convention. There doesn't necessarily have to be this one place where you squeeze them all. And the other thing, I'm glad to see that we apparently have a mix here, at least according to gender, as I perceive gender. But it's not all white guys, but there's that as well. And several years ago, people were saying, well, if you see you're on a panel, and again, some things are hard to perceive based on name. You don't always know how people are representing themselves, but they're trying to make sure that when people come to your panel, they're not all looking at a homogenized, a whole bunch of gray-haired, cishet white dudes kind of thing. So there's that can be done proactively from the con runner standpoint when they assemble that gigantic spreadsheet with all the hundreds of us, and from us ourselves looking at, well, who am I with, and saying, gee, they're all me. You might as well just have 4 of me standing there. So those are 2 things that can occur with the programming standpoint.
Very good. Michael?
Yeah, just real quick. I'm thinking of the International Conference for the Fantastic and the Arts, which is more of an academic con, but it brings fantasy writers. Authors are treated on the same level as academics at that conference, and it's a great kind of combo conference for that. I love it. It's held annually in Florida every year, and I try to make it as much as I can. But they offer sort of ambassadors. They appoint people who are regulars from the convention to kind of be a mentor or a guide to the first timers. And I know not every con committee can create that situation, but if it's possible, like in a writers organization sponsored convention like StokerCon or something like that, it might very well be possible to have like a mentor meet with their newbie at the front door, when the gate opens. So that kind of thing, I think, is always a good kind of, it can be a crutch, but it can be a useful crutch for a brand new attendee to have somebody there that they can at least talk to and kind of get some guidance.
And everyone who's here now has met at least 4 of us. So,
That's true. So you should feel free to come up to us the next time we're
unless you don't
somewhere.
know.
I'll just say, just to
I was just
piggyback
going to go to
briefly on
Jennifer.
Michael, that SIFWA did do that starting maybe 4 or 5 years ago at the Pittsburgh Nebulas, that they started a mentorship situation. So if this is your first SIFWA Nebula event, they will, on the first day or the second morning, you'll sit for an hour with someone who will explain what it's all about, make you feel comfortable so you know at least one person.
That's awesome. I didn't know they were doing that. That's great.
Okay, Jennifer?
I have nothing else to add. You guys knocked it out of the park.
Okay,
great.
Michael, would you put in the name of the international thingamajiggy for the arts? I'm glad you said it was good for authors, because every time I think of it, I'm terrified of the academic side. I'm a biologist, not an expert in the literature. So now that I know that, that's good to hear. I will just say that we've got 5 minutes left. Okay, sure. Closing statements is telling people who have a friend or whatever why they should bring them and what would be the best part of going to a convention if they've never done it before. Jennifer.
The best part of going to a convention that they've never done before. Geez, for me, it was just sort of meeting like-minded people. I mean, like everybody said, just finding your people, and just everything, every aspect of it is just tailored toward your own mindset. And that makes it just such a wonderful experience. Everything from the tables in the sales room to, just bumping into someone and recognizing them, and all that. It's just fantastic.
Scott?
Yeah, meeting people who love the things you love. And if we have been together, if this has been a physical space, I'd have fed you all by now. When I show up at the panel, I tend to bring jelly beans or donuts or cookies or something, and to keep people happy. We might have gone on a donut walk. When I'm in Baltimore, I just let everyone know, hey, let's all walk over to Lily. Anyone who wants to, we'll get cannolis together. And in a non-outside the convention way. So as if you see me in the future at a convention, I will tell you where we're going to go. If there's a WorldCon next year, I'm going to be organizing cupcake hikes, donut hikes, chocolate hikes. Let's hope that by next August something like that happens, because I hope to see everyone there. But that's one thing. There's meeting new people. There are so many people I met on. I'll mention one last thing. Started several years ago. Stroll with the Stars that Stu and Steven Siegel started at WorldCon in Denver in 2008. Before the programming starts, they would say, anyone who wants to, we're going to take a 1 mile slow, gentle walk around the neighborhood. And that gives you a chance, like a coffee lodge, to hang out. And they 3 or 4 writers, editors to be there. And I've met so many people I didn't know in that, 3 or 4 of us just wandering around early in the morning looking at the site. So that's another thing that has been done at conventions, to sort of bring people already there with the new people.
I love it.
Yeah, I have one tip. I think one of the ways I most benefited when I started going to conventions was to actually go to the author readings. They tend to be the least, they have the smallest crowds, which gives you kind of a connection to that author. So particularly if they're not, the George R.R. Martins, who will fill a giant, auditorium, but maybe it's a lesser known author that maybe you know or familiar with from an anthology, or they just had their first novel out. Go to those author readings. That gives you a chance to connect with some professionals who are experienced, and they'll be more willing to talk to you because you'll have the story they read or something as a shared text to talk about.
And there's breakfast. I'm an early riser, so whenever I go to a convention, I always have a Saturday morning breakfast for the first 10 people that say they'd like to join me. And it's a great chance to it's great for me, because then I come away knowing 9 more people than I did before I got there. And for the rest of the day, we wave high and do different things. And it's great to, a lot of authors have these things, but please don't forget, there are a lot of authors who are very introverted And just being inside a hotel is a big deal for them. So you've got to also respect that part of it. So everybody's going to go back to conventions the minute that the doors open in reality, but this has been great. And I want to thank all our hosts at Confluence. And closing statements, people?
Well, I put a link in the chat. I spoke for almost an hour just on this topic in a far more organized way that managed to put in every single thing I could think of to say about this. I put in the link. It was a speech I gave at the World Fantasy Convention in 2018. So if you wanted me to ramble on more about my suggestions about how to make science fiction a more welcoming place, you can go there. And if you don't want to watch it, I also have all the text at that link. So you can just skim it as quickly as you desire.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I
This is a great panel.
Yeah, it is. And I just would like to remind everyone involved that, you know, when you go to a convention, a lot of us are introverts. Writers are often introverts. A lot of the fans are often introverts. We may be on the autism spectrum. Don't make any assumptions about the person standing next to you. Just smile, say hi. And I think that'll go a long way. So that's my closing statement.
You might hug by Sunday, but you never know. Michael?
Yeah, I really like that. There are a lot of writers and people who get into this business are introverts. That's kind of, you know, this becomes reading is a place where you can communicate silently. I wanted to say that once you've been to a convention or two, try to pay it forward. You know, keep in good communication with the new blood. You know, talk to people you've never seen before. Take the effort to reach out. And you know, if you see a lonely spirit at the snack bar and you're going to get a snack, you know, just say, hey, what are you doing? Did you go to a good panel today? You know, that kind of thing. Maybe even go out to lunch with a stranger. I know it's weird, but you know, a lot of my close friends now are people I just happened to be in the elevator with at a convention once upon a time. And they said, hey, we're having a room party. Come on, come join us. You know, in any other circumstance, I'd run screaming, no, I'm not coming to your hotel room. But at a con, that kind of thing might be a good thing to do, depending on the person. So be safe, but be open to new experiences and keep paying it forward too.
And this is a great way to meet people that you've met only online. A lot of us have really long-term relationships online and have never met in face-to-face. So that's another thing we can do as people who have more experience with this, is we can say, well, you and you don't know each other, but you both know me. So we'll meet together and just create those communities within a community. I think they're going to put the sign up any second. Oh, and here's a very good point. Helping to run a convention is, if you're coming into it as a fan, thank you. Consider volunteering. And at that note, thank you so much. You've all been amazing. Conventions are better all the time for being together.